The coat rack in the corner. Chapter 1. Rue at 7. Rue was 7 the first time she heard it move. Not much, barely anything at all. But she woke at 2 in the morning the way you wake for a sound before you've consciously registered it, some part of her already alert before the rest of her caught up. The shadow had been standing in the corner of her room for as long as she could remember, since before memory, really, the way the wallpaper had always been there, and the crack in the ceiling shaped like a running dog. It never moved, it never did anything. Her mother called it Mr. Nobody when Rue was very small, in the breezy voice adults use for things they've decided not to be afraid of, and after a while Rue stopped being afraid of it too. You couldn't be scared of the coat rack. You couldn't be scared of Mr. Nobody. It was just the two of them in the house, Rue and her mother, and had been for as long as Rue could remember that too. There had been a father once before memory the way there had been a version of the world before the shadows, a photograph on the hallway shelf, a man with her same crooked front tooth, a name she'd learned to spell before she understood it belonged to anyone real. A car, a road, a shadow that had not been there the day before and was there that day, standing where it had no business standing. Rue didn't know the story so much as she knew its silhouette, the outline of a thing nobody in the house ever coloured in. Except that night his mouth was moving. Just barely, a small wet motion, like someone chewing on a thought before they were ready to say it out loud. Rue sat up in bed and pulled her knees to her chest and watched, and after a long while, long enough that her legs went pins and needles under her, a sound came out of him, quiet enough that Rue had to hold her own breath to catch the edges of it. Not a smooth hum but something with breaks in it, distinct pieces, syllables that almost meant something. The way a familiar voice sounds like it's about to say your name from another room, right up until it doesn't. She didn't feel scared. That was the part she could never explain to anyone later, not really, not even to herself. She felt like she'd walked in on the middle of something, like a song already in progress that she'd have to listen a while longer before she could sing along. So she did. Lying back down, eyes on the ceiling, she let the sound move through her the way you let a nursery rhyme move through you, not understanding it exactly, just knowing where the next beat wanted to land. By the third night she could almost keep pace with him. By the second week she had 4 lines of it sitting in her mouth like stones, smooth and ready, though she couldn't have told you what a single one of them meant. She told her mother over cereal on a Tuesday. She didn't build up to it or make an announcement. She just started singing, the way kids sing things, half a tune, half a mumble, a rhythm more than words, swaying a little on the kitchen stool with a spoon still in her hand. Her mother laughed not unkindly. "Where did you hear that?" "Mr. Nobody," Rue said, "in my room." Her mother's hand went still on the counter for a moment, just a moment, gone almost before it started, and then she was wiping the ring of milk away again, moving the way she always kept moving. She shook her head, a small private motion, and smiled. "You've got some imagination, kiddo." "He says it every night." "I bet he does." A kiss on the top of her head, distracted, warm. "Eat your breakfast, we're gonna be late." That was all, it wasn't cruelty. Rue understood that even then, without having words for it yet, her mother wasn't punishing her or calling her a liar. She simply wasn't listening, not in the way that would have required stopping, sitting down, asking a second question. To her mother it was a cute noise a cute kid made about a made-up friend, filed away in the same drawer as monsters under the bed, and the tooth fairies going rate. A closed door before Rue had even finished knocking. It would be years before Rue understood that some doors are closed gently on purpose, by someone standing on the other side of them, holding something back with both hands. Rue ate her cereal, she did not try again. But she kept singing it to herself, quietly in the dark, matching Mr. Nobody note for note, night after night, for years, long after the world outside her window started to notice its own shadows twitching, long after the first grainy phone videos and the radio call-in shows and the arguments at the dinner table about whether any of it was real. She already knew. She had known since she was 7 years old, humming along in the Blue 2 in the morning dark to a song no one else could hear, in a house where nobody thought to ask her to sing it twice. Chapter 2, Rue at 12. They were sitting on the Delaney's back porch when the shadows started moving, which felt, to 12-year-old Rue, like the kind of detail that belonged in a story rather than an actual Tuesday. "My cousin swears one of them turned its head," Priya said, cross-legged on the top step, peeling the label off a soda bottle in one long curl. "Like all the way," she said. It was looking at her. "That's not what's happening." Theo upside down on the porch swing, feet hooked over the backrest, blood pooling visibly in his face. "It's like a twitch. My dad showed me a video, it's barely anything." "A twitch is still moving." Priya flicked the label at him. "Yesterday it wasn't moving at all, now it's moving, that's not nothing." "It's been years of not moving," Theo said. "I think we'd know if they were gonna come alive." Rue sat with her knees drawn up, chin resting on them, and said nothing for a while. There was a shadow at the edge of the Delaney's yard, half in the hedge, the way there was a shadow at the edge of everyone's yard now, everywhere, all over the world, the way there was a shadow in the corner of her own room that she still matched, note for note, most nights, out of habit as much as anything else at this point. Habit, and something else she didn't examine too closely. She had pieced most of it together by then. Nobody had ever sat her down and told her. She'd built it herself out of scraps and edges. An old newspaper clipping she wasn't supposed to have found. The exact year on the photograph in the hallway. The specific stretch of road her mother took the long way to avoid every single time, without ever once explaining why. A shadow had been standing somewhere it shouldn't have been, and a car had swerved, and that was the whole of it as far as Rue could tell. It hadn't reached for anything, hadn't moved, hadn't done a single thing except exist in a place at the wrong moment. That was the part that sat strangest with her. It hadn't hurt anyone. It had just been there the way it was always just there, and the world had done the rest. "They're not going to hurt anyone," she said. She hadn't meant it to come out sounding so certain. It just did, flat, easy, the same tone she'd used to tell them what day of the week it was. Priya looked over. "How do you know that?" "I don't know it, I just don't think they will." Rue picked at a splinter on the step, not looking up. "They're not really doing anything, they're just—" She stopped herself before singing. "Talking to themselves or whatever, it's not about us." "It's not about us," Theo repeated, flipping himself right side up too fast, going a little pale with it. "You say that like you'd know if it was." "I don't," Rue shrugged, aiming for boredom, hitting something a half step off from it. "It's just a feeling." Priya was still looking at her. Not suspicious, exactly. Priya didn't have a suspicious setting, not at 12, not about her best friend since 3rd grade. But there for a second was a small crease of attention, the specific look of someone filing a detail away without quite knowing why it needed filing. "You get weird about them sometimes," she said. "The shadows, you never want to talk about them like everyone else does." "I don't think about them that much," Rue said, which was, by a wide margin, the biggest lie she had told anyone in her whole life up to that point. Whatever, Priya let it go, the way 12-year-olds let almost everything go, distraction being the great mercy of that age. She was already turning back to Theo, already reloading the soda bottle label for another shot at his head. "Anyway, my cousin's probably lying." "She lies about everything. Remember when she said she met that guy from the band?" The conversation moved on without her, the way conversations do, water finding a new channel around a stone that didn't move. Rue let her breath out slow, watched the shadow in the hedge and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, about how easy it would be to just keep talking. To tell them what she heard some nights. To say I know 4 more lines now than I did last year and watch their faces try to find a place to put that. She thought about the last time she told someone the truth out loud, 7 years old at the kitchen counter, singing half a tune to her mother over a bowl of cereal. She remembered exactly how her mother had answered, that same warm voice already moving on to the next thing the morning needed from her. I bet he does. Not a question, not really even a listen. Just a kind, distracted door closing, so gently Rue hadn't even felt it shut at the time. She understood it differently now than she had at 7. Her mother hadn't been failing to listen. She'd been choosing, every single time the subject came anywhere near her, not to let it land, because landing meant a road and a swerve and a version of the story that no 7-year-old at a cereal bowl needed to carry. Rue had never told her mother she knew any of it. She wasn't sure she ever would. Some doors, she decided, were kinder left shut from both sides. She picked the splinter loose instead, and said nothing else about it. And by the time the streetlights came on and Priya's mom called them in for dinner, nobody remembered the conversation had ever gotten close to strange at all. Nobody but Rue, who remembered everything, and who was already very good by 12, at being the only one who did. Chapter 3: The Silent Years. The word rumour stopped applying somewhere around Rue's 14th birthday. It happened the way most impossible things become ordinary, not with an announcement but with erosion. First it was late-night radio, a caller from Ohio insisting her neighbour's shadow had said something to her, and the host's practiced, indulgent laugh. Then it was a grainy video from an airport in Seoul, a security guard's phone held too close, a shadow's mouth moving in a way that 100 amateur video analysts insisted was compression artifacts, wind, nothing, coincidence, and 40 million views by the end of the week regardless. Then it was 2 videos, then a folder of them, then a subreddit, then a hashtag, then a segment on the morning shows filed under the same tone they used for coyote sightings and strange lights over the desert. Isn't this interesting? More after the break. Rue watched all of it with the specific, hollowed-out patience of someone watching people slowly discover directions to a place she'd been living in for 7 years. She didn't say anything. Not at 14, when a substitute teacher played one of the videos for the class as a fun current events tangent, and half the room laughed, and the other half went quiet in a way that felt, to Rue, like the closest thing to being understood she'd ever get from a room full of people who had no idea what they were looking at. Not at 15, when the word whisperers started showing up in headlines, half joking, half not, and her mother, still warm, still moving too fast through mornings to really stop, said over dinner, "Isn't that wild? I always figured they were just sort of decoration," and laughed at her own word choice. It was a good laugh, an easy one, the kind that would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent years learning exactly what her mother's voice sounded like when it was working. Rue laughed too, because it was easier than the alternative, and because some part of her by then almost believed decoration was a kinder word than the truth, kinder for both of them, maybe, in a house where neither one had ever once said the word road out loud. She kept singing at night. That never stopped. If anything it sharpened, she'd lie in the dark with her phone's notes app open, typing out approximations of sounds she had no alphabet for, little clusters of vowels and stresses, slash marks for the pauses that felt important, question marks, where a syllable seemed to bend in a direction English didn't have a name for. She filled 4 notebooks by the time she was 16, cross-referenced, color-coded, useless to anyone but her, because she still didn't know what any of it meant. She just knew how it went. The way you know the tune to a song in a language you've never studied, every rise and fall present and correct, every silence exactly as long as it needed to be, and not one word of it translatable, not even to herself. Meanwhile, the world built scaffolding around the mystery she'd been quietly living inside since before she could tie her shoes. Universities opened departments. Grants were written. A woman named Dr. Margaret Lowe published a paper, Rue read it twice, alone in her room, heart going strange and fast, that mapped 41 distinct whisper fragments recorded across 6 continents and noted, almost as an aside in paragraph 9, that several fragments appeared to recur with what the paper called structural regularity, cause unknown. Rue read that sentence a dozen times. Cause unknown. She thought about the 4 notebooks under her bed. She thought about the kitchen counter and the porch steps and every door that had ever closed on her gently, with a kiss on the head and a warm, distracted voice telling her it was nothing, it was cute. It was some imagination she had. She opened a blank email that same night, cursor blinking under a subject line she never filled in. She got as far as Dr. Lowe, I think I might be able to help you understand, before she stopped, staring at the sentence, hearing it in every voice that had ever told her something else entirely. Some imagination, kiddo. Isn't that wild? I bet he does. She closed the tab, not because she doubted what she knew. Because she'd asked to be believed before, and she wasn't sure yet that she could survive being told, one more time, that it was nothing. But she started keeping the woman's name in the same private place. She kept the rest of it, the notebooks, the pauses, the 4 in the morning certainty that she was the only person on earth who'd been given this particular, useless, unbearable kind of proof. Waiting, without admitting to herself that she was waiting, for a door that might, for once, actually open when she knocked. Chapter 4: The Correspondence. She wrote the first email 3 times before sending anything. The final version was 4 sentences long, and she read it back so many times the words stopped looking like words. Rue wrote, Dr. Lowe, I read your paper on fragment recurrence with a lot of interest. I noticed in Table 3 that fragment 12 and fragment 27 are listed as unrelated, but I think they might actually be the same phrase, just recorded at different points in its cycle. I could be wrong. I don't have any formal background in this, I just found it interesting. Thank you for your work on this. Rue. The reply came 4 days later, longer than Rue expected and more careful than the polite one-liners she'd braced for. Maggie replied, Rue, thank you for reading closely enough to catch that. You're right that 12 and 27 share a phonetic backbone, though my team and I went back and forth on whether the divergence was significant enough to note them as distinct. I appreciate you flagging it. It's the kind of detail that gets lost when you're staring at 41 fragments for 3 years straight. Can I ask what draws you to this? Most of the public correspondence I get is either fear-driven or fairly conspiratorial. Yours reads like someone who's actually looked at the data. Best, Maggie. They wrote back and forth for 3 weeks after that, small things mostly. Rue asking careful questions that were really just excuses to see what Maggie already knew. Maggie answering generously, the way people do when they're used to talking to no one who's actually listening. Rue kept her replies close to the ground, interested, informed, ordinary. A smart stranger with a hobby. But she stopped being able to keep the feeling of it off her face. She started racing home from school instead of drifting there the way she used to, cutting conversations with friends short in the hallway, phone already half out of her pocket before the final bell finished ringing, just to see if there was a new reply waiting. She read each one twice through before she even took her shoes off. It was a specific, giddy kind of urgency she didn't have a lot of practice with. The feeling of having something to look forward to that had nothing to do with anyone finding out. For once, because there was nothing left to hide from this particular person. Her mother noticed before Rue did. She caught it in small things, the empty side of the couch on a Friday night where a friend used to sit, the way Rue answered nothing, homework a little too fast when asked what she was smiling at on her laptop, the sound of her door clicking shut earlier and earlier each evening. One night she knocked and leaned into Rue's doorway, arms crossed loosely, trying to sound casual and not quite landing it. You've been in your room a lot lately. Everything okay with Priya and Theo? Yeah, we're fine. Rue didn't look up from the screen. I've just been busy. Busy, her mother repeated in the careful, testing voice of someone deciding whether to push. She didn't push. She just stood there a moment longer, watching her daughter's face do something she hadn't seen it do in a long time, an unguarded kind of happy, private and complete, the kind Rue used to only ever wear alone in the dark with a shadow that couldn't ask her anything back. Okay, well, doors open if you want it to be. It went that way until the email about Fragment 6. Rue wrote, I think Fragment 6 might actually be an opener, not a closer. The recording from the Lagos site in the first year had a variant of it that came in low and rose at the end, which reads more like a question than an answer. I don't know if that recording's public anywhere. I might be misremembering it wrong. There was no recording from Lagos in the first year. Not a public one. Maggie's team had one internal, unreleased, flagged low priority, and shelved for a re-review that had never happened. Rue had no way of knowing that. Rue had no way of knowing it existed at all. The reply took 2 days this time instead of 1. Maggie replied, Rue, that recording was never published. It's not in the paper, it's not on any forum I'm aware of. It's not anywhere a member of the public should have been able to hear it, let alone transcribe the pitch contour correctly, which you just did, better than my own team did on first pass. I'm not accusing you of anything, I just need to understand how you know this. Maggie. Rue sat with that email open for 11 minutes before she answered it. She knew because she checked the timestamps afterward. Unable to quite believe it had only taken 11 minutes, a stretch of time that did not feel long and also felt like most of her life. She thought about a kitchen counter, a porch step, a word decoration that her mother had used laughing at dinner without meaning any harm by it at all. She thought about the fact that nobody had ever asked her this question before. Not once, not really. How do you know this was not the same question as what's wrong with you or where did you hear that nonsense? It didn't already have an answer built into it. It was just a door, actually open, actually waiting to see what was on the other side. Rue wrote, I've been hearing it since I was 7. Not understanding it, I still don't know what any of it means, not really. But I know how it's sung. I just know how it goes. Like when you know a song even if you don't know the words. I have 4 notebooks of it going back almost 10 years, all from the same one in the corner of my room, night after night my whole life. I told my mom once when I was little. She didn't believe me, not in a mean way, she just didn't think it was real, and I stopped bringing it up after that. I've never told anyone else the whole truth about it until right now. I don't totally know why I'm telling you. I'm not a scientist, I don't have a degree in anything that would make this credible. But I know the structure of this thing better than anyone, I think, because I grew up with it, listening every night like a lullaby. Rue. Maggie's reply came back in 19 minutes. Maggie replied, Rue, I believe you. I want to be very clear about that before I say anything else, because I suspect you don't hear those 2 words nearly often enough. I believe you. I've spent 3 years staring at fragments with no sequence, trying to build an order out of pieces that never once appeared together. What you're describing, a single continuous source, over a decade, structurally intact, is something my entire team has been trying and failing to reconstruct from thousands of disconnected data points. I'd like to work with you properly, if you're willing. Formally, on the record, with my team behind you and not just me in an inbox. I can't promise what that looks like yet, or what it means for how this eventually gets used. I have people above me who care about this project in ways that aren't always about getting it right, if I'm honest with you, and that's a conversation I'll want to have with you before anything else happens. But I think you might have the missing pieces I've been looking for since the beginning of this. And for what it's worth, for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry someone didn't ask you this question a long time ago. Maggie. Rue read that email in her room, door closed, the notebooks in a stack on the desk beside her, 4 of them, 10 years of handwriting getting steadier and more certain with every year that passed. Somewhere behind her, faint, right on schedule, the shadow in the corner had already started for the night. She didn't cry exactly. It was closer to something loosening, some small muscle she hadn't known she'd been holding tense since she was 7 years old, letting go all at once. At dinner that week, when her mother asked what she'd been so absorbed in on her laptop lately, Rue said without much weight in it, like it was nothing, "Oh, I've been talking to that researcher, the one studying the whispers. I've been helping her out a little." "That's nice, honey," her mother said, her hand pausing over the salt for just a beat before she picked it up anyway, easy as anything, the way she'd gotten so good at making things look. "That's really nice." Rue let it sit there, small and true and incomplete, the way it always had been between them. She didn't correct it. She didn't add anything. It was, she thought, as much as that particular door had ever opened. She understood now, in a way she hadn't at 7, that her mother was holding it that far open on purpose with both hands. She could have said more. Explained it properly, pushed until her mother really understood what she'd just been told. She didn't. Some part of her understood that her mother was already giving as much as she safely could, and that not asking for more was the kindest thing left for Rue to do in return. Chapter 5: The House Visit. The email that changed everything was shorter than Rue expected, for something that big. Maggie replied, "Rue, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no. Everything you've described, the notebooks, the years of it, I believe every word. But I'd be lying if I said some part of me, the scientist part, needs to see it for myself before I can act on it the way I want to. Not because I doubt you, because that's simply how I'm built, and I think you'd rather I be honest about that than pretend otherwise. Would you be willing to let me visit? To meet him, Mr. Nobody, I mean, if that's still what you call him, and to meet you properly in person, not through a screen. I understand you're still in high school, which means this isn't really a question for you alone. If your mother would be willing to have me, I'd like to ask her directly, whenever you think is the right time. No pressure either way. I've already gotten so much further than I ever expected to, thanks to you. Maggie. Rue read it 4 times before she went downstairs. Her mother was at the kitchen table, laptop open, doing the thing she did most evenings where the screen held her attention and none of her actually was on it. Rue stood in the doorway longer than she meant to. "Hey," she said, "can I ask you something?" Her mother didn't look up. Shoot. "The researcher I've been helping, Dr. Lowe." Rue made herself keep going before the sentence could close its own door the way sentences about this always seem to. "She wants to come here to meet me and to see." She made herself say it plainly, the way she never had before, not once, not in 10 years, to see Mr. Nobody, in my room. Her mother's hands went still on the keyboard. It was the same stillness from the kitchen counter 11 years ago, the one Rue had spent a lifetime learning to read and never once mentioned out loud. And for a moment Rue thought she'd made a mistake, thought the door was about to close the old way, gently, kindly, with a change of subject and a "we'll see" that meant no. Instead her mother closed the laptop, slowly, both hands flat on the lid for a second like she was holding something down. "She wants to come here," her mother said, not a question exactly, more like she was testing the weight of the sentence out loud before deciding what to do with it. "Yeah. Into your room." "Yes, Mom." Her mother was quiet for long enough that Rue almost filled the silence. The old reflex, the one that said never mind. Forget it, it's fine, but she held it this time, made herself wait. The way she'd learned to wait out silences with fragments and cadences that never explained themselves either. Okay, her mother said finally. Her voice had gone strange and careful, like she was walking on something she wasn't sure would hold her weight. Okay, yes, tell her yes. You sure? Her mother looked at her, really looked, the way she hadn't in a while, the way that always made Rue feel both entirely seen and a little unbearably exposed. You've been carrying this by yourself a long time, she said. If someone finally wants to help carry it instead, I'm not going to be the reason you say no. She didn't say anything about the road, she didn't have to. Rue heard it anyway underneath, the way she heard everything underneath, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither one of them closed the door on it. They just let it sit there between them, open a crack, and moved on to setting a date. Maggie came on a Saturday in ordinary clothes, without any of the equipment Rue had half expected, no team, no recorders. Just Maggie, shorter than her photo and a little grayer at the temples, standing a little stiffly on the porch with a bottle of wine. She seemed to immediately regret bringing it to a house with a teenager in it, laughing at herself before Rue's mother had even opened the door all the way. I panicked at the store, Maggie admitted, holding it out anyway. I don't know what you bring to this kind of thing, there isn't really an etiquette book. Rue's mother took it with a startled laugh of her own, a real one, Rue noted, not the working kind, and said something about putting it in the fridge for later. And for a strange, suspended half-hour the three of them sat in the living room and talked about nothing in particular. The drive up, the weather, Maggie's job before it became this job. The way adults did when they were circling something too large to walk into directly. It was Rue's mother in the end who said it first. You want to see him. Maggie set her cup down carefully. If that's still all right. It's all right. Her mother's voice didn't shake exactly, but there was something underneath it holding very still, the way a held breath holds still. I haven't been up in her room she stopped, recalculated, in a long time actually. Not for that reason, just you know how it is, she's 16, doesn't want her mom hovering. It wasn't the whole truth and all three of them knew it. And none of them said so. And Rue understood, watching her mother say it anyway, that this was its own kind of gift. Her mother building her a soft place to land in front of a stranger instead of the truth, which was that she hadn't set foot in that room in years because of what stood in the corner of it. You don't have to come up, Rue said quietly. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. I know I don't. She came up anyway. Mr. Nobody was exactly where he always was, motionless, blank-eyed, unremarkable in the particular way that 10 years of ordinary evenings had made him. Maggie stood in the doorway for a moment before she stepped fully inside, and Rue watched her professional composure do something complicated, not fear exactly, more like the specific vertigo of finally standing inside a thing you've only ever studied from the outside. May I? Maggie asked, and Rue realized she was asking permission to get closer, the way you'd ask before approaching someone's grief. He won't do anything, Rue said. He never has. Maggie crossed the room slowly and stood a few feet from him, close enough to see whatever there was to see, and was quiet for a long moment. Behind her in the doorway, Rue's mother stood very still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the shadow her daughter had grown up beside, really looking at it, maybe, for the first time since a road and a swerve had made looking at it unbearable. He's smaller than I pictured, Maggie said eventually, which wasn't the observation Rue had expected, and somehow was exactly the right one, small, ordinary, 10 years of furniture instead of 10 years of monster. He always has been, Rue said. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? Nobody ever thought he was anything to be scared of. Nobody answered that. Rue's mother uncrossed her arms, finally, and came the rest of the way into the room and stood beside her daughter, and the three of them stayed there a while, watching a shadow that had never once moved on its own, in a room that had held one particular, private grief for longer than any of them had ever said out loud. Chapter 6, Staying Up. Nobody said the word stay out loud. It just sort of happened, Maggie glancing at her watch around 8 and then not moving to leave, Rue's mother reheating leftovers for 3 instead of driving Maggie back to her hotel. The evening quietly deciding itself around a question none of them wanted to ask directly. Do you want to actually hear it? They ended up on the floor of Rue's room a little after 11, which felt strange and then quickly didn't, Maggie cross-legged with her back against the bed frame, notebook open on her knee out of habit more than expectation. Rue's mother in the doorway at first, then after a while sitting too on the very edge of the bed, like she was testing whether the room would hold her. Rue on the floor across from Mr. Nobody, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him, the way she never had in 10 years and never would. He usually starts around 1, Rue said into the quiet, give or take. We can wait, Maggie said. They waited. Rue's mother didn't say much. She sat very straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes moving every so often to the shadow in the corner and then away, like it hurt to hold the look too long and she was rationing herself. At one point she asked quietly, not really to anyone, does it always look like that? Even when it's not doing anything. Yeah, Rue said, he's just like that. He doesn't look like anyone, her mother said, not quite a question. No, Rue watched her mother's face carefully as she said it, the way she'd been watching it her whole life without either of them acknowledging she was doing it. He never has. He's not anybody's. That's part of what makes it worse, I think. If he looked like someone, at least you'd know who to be angry at. Her mother didn't answer that, but something in her shoulders came down half an inch, and Rue understood it as an answer anyway. Maggie, tactfully, did not ask what that exchange had meant. She'd learned over the weeks, when a silence in this family was hers to sit inside of rather than fill. Midnight came and went. Rue's mother made tea nobody really drank, just to have something to do with her hands. Maggie's notebook stayed open to the same blank page for over an hour, pen uncapped, forgotten. At some point Rue caught her mother watching her, not the shadow her, with an expression Rue didn't entirely have a name for, something between grief and awe, and the specific tenderness of a person realizing, late, how long her daughter had been sitting on a floor like this one, alone, every single night for years. At 12:51, Mr. Nobody's mouth began to move. It was so small that Maggie for a moment seemed to think she'd imagined it. She went rigid, eyes locked on him, breath held so completely that Rue heard it catch. Rue's mother made a sound, low, involuntary, not quite a gasp, both hands coming up to cover her mouth like she could hold something in or keep something out. Rue never worked out which. There, Rue said quietly, that's the start of it. The whisper came a few seconds later, barely a whisper at all, more like the memory of one, a hum with breaks in it, syllables surfacing and vanishing almost before they existed. Rue closed her eyes, the way she always did, and let it move through her the way she'd let it move through her since she was 7, familiar as her own heartbeat. And somewhere in the dark, she heard Maggie's pen finally scratch against paper, fast, urgent, trying to catch something that had no interest in being caught by anyone who hadn't spent a decade learning it by heart. Her mother didn't move at all. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands still pressed to her mouth, staring at the shadow that had, 11 years ago and 100 miles away, stood in a road at exactly the wrong moment, and listened for the first time in her daughter's whole life to the sound that had cost her everything and asked for nothing in return. Nobody spoke again until it stopped, 4 minutes later, the room settling back into its ordinary, furniture-quiet dark. That's it, Maggie's voice was hushed, almost reverent. That's the whole thing. That's one pass of it, Rue said. He does it again around 3, different fragment usually. Maggie looked down at her notebook, 3 lines of frantic, useless shorthand, nothing close to what she'd need, and then at Rue, something like wonder breaking loose across her face despite every effort to stay clinical about it. "You've been doing this every night, for 10 years. "Not every night," Rue said, "just most of them." Her mother made a small sound that might have been a laugh if a laugh could also be the thing right before crying. "Most nights," she repeated quietly, like she was trying the words on, like they cost something to say. "For 10 years, and I never once." She didn't finish it, she didn't have to. Rue reached over in the dark and found her mother's hand, and her mother held on like she meant it, and none of them said anything else at all until the room, and the house and the whole ordinary night around them went fully and completely quiet. Chapter 7: The Vigils. It became a thing after that, not a routine exactly, nothing so formal as a schedule, but a pull that kept bringing Maggie back to the house on weekends instead of just the lab. She'd drive up Friday evening with a bag and a laptop, and more often than not now, something for dinner. She'd figured out fast that Rue's mother relaxed the moment there was a task in front of her, chopping vegetables, stirring something on the stove, hands busy while the rest of her caught up to whatever the evening was going to ask of her. They fell into their own version of a ritual. Dinner first, the three of them at the kitchen table, conversation drifting easily now in a way it hadn't the first time, Maggie telling stories about her early fieldwork, the years before any of this, back when she studied dying languages instead of impossible ones. Rue's mother, unprompted, telling a story about a work trip gone wrong that made all three of them laugh so hard Rue nearly knocked over her water glass. It was, Rue thought more than once, the most normal her house had felt in a decade. Which was a strange thing to think about, an evening that would end with all of them sitting on a floor, waiting for a shadow to start talking. On the nights Maggie stayed, they'd head upstairs around 11. Rue's mother came every time now, no hesitation, no doorway hovering. She brought a blanket up on the second visit and claimed a permanent spot on the floor by the third, back against the wall. Knees pulled up exactly the way Rue used to sit alone for years before any of this. Sometimes she dozed off before midnight came and woke herself when the whisper started, blinking, disoriented, and then very still, very awake. The way a person gets still around something they've decided to stop flinching from. Maggie's shorthand got faster each week. She'd started bringing a small recorder eventually, quietly, almost apologetically, asking Rue first, "Is this all right? I don't want this to feel like something I'm taking from you." And Rue had said yes without having to think about it, because it had stopped feeling, weeks ago now, like something being taken. It felt like something finally being shared. Rue's mother started asking her own questions too, in a way that still caught Rue off guard every time it happened. "What does that pause mean, do you think? Is it always the same length? Does he ever skip a night? Did you notice any pattern the year you were 9, when he seemed to go quiet for a while?" Small, careful, curious questions, years' worth of them arriving all at once like water finally finding a crack in something that had been sealed a long time. Rue answered every single one. She'd been waiting, she realized, without ever quite letting herself know she was waiting, for exactly this, not forgiveness, because there had never been anything to forgive but company. Somebody finally sitting on the floor beside her instead of standing at a doorway, worried about the room. One night in late October, after the whisper had come and gone, and Maggie had fallen half asleep against the bed frame with her notebook sliding off her knee, Rue's mother caught Rue's eye across the dim room, and very quietly, so as not to wake her, mouthed, "I like her." Rue mouthed back, "Me too." Her mother's smile in the dark was the kind Rue hadn't seen on her in longer than she could remember, not the working smile, not the one built to hold a room steady. Just an ordinary one, tired and real and entirely her own. It didn't fix anything. Rue understood that even then, even happy, the road was still the road. The shadow in the corner was still the reason her father's chair at the table had sat empty for 11 years. None of that had softened or gone anywhere. but something had changed anyway. The three of them had built, without ever discussing it directly, a small room within the larger one. A place where the worst thing that had ever happened to their family could sit in the corner, silent, ordinary, almost gentle, while they simply lived alongside it together instead of each of them carrying it alone. Rue slipped out to the bathroom first, one Saturday in November, somewhere in the stretch after the 1 a.m. whisper and before whatever came next. She was almost back to her room when she heard her mother's voice low, and stopped just short of the doorway instead of going in. "I should probably head to the hotel," Maggie's voice quieter than usual, reluctant. "You don't have to yet," a pause, chairs shifting. "Can I say something?" "Of course." Rue stood very still in the hallway, one hand flat against the wall, and listened. Her mother was quiet for a moment, like she was choosing the words carefully, the way she chose most things. "I don't think you understand what you've given us." Another pause. "She used to disappear into this room every night like it was the only place that made sense to her, and I let her, because I didn't know how to follow her into it. I didn't know how to ask. I'm not even sure I wanted to know the answer, if I'm honest. Some part of me was scared of what I'd find if I really looked." Her voice caught just slightly before she steadied it. "You looked. You just walked in and asked her the question I should have asked 11 years ago, and she answered you, and now I get to sit on this floor with my daughter instead of standing outside a door I built myself." "She's the one who did the hard part," Maggie said. "I just showed up and asked." "You showed up," her mother said, "and you kept showing up. That's not nothing, that's not just anything." A breath. "Thank you, I don't think I've said that yet properly. Thank you for seeing her, for believing her before you had any real reason to." There was a long quiet after that, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling. "For what it's worth," Maggie said eventually, softer than before, "I don't think I would have had the courage to keep pushing on this if it hadn't been for both of you. It's easy to treat data like data when there's no family attached to it. Sitting in this room changed what all of this means to me. I don't know how to explain that without sounding like I'm overstepping." "You're not overstepping." Her mother's voice smiled somehow. "You're part of it now, whether either of us planned on that or not." Rue waited a moment longer in the hallway, letting it settle, before she finally pushed the door open like she'd heard none of it, carrying the feeling of it with her instead. Two people who loved her in different ways for different reasons, finally sitting in the same room together and meaning every word. It was, Rue thought, the closest thing to peace the house had held in over a decade. Which was, of course, exactly when the email from the funding office arrived. Chapter 8: The Lab. The lab was smaller than Rue had pictured. By now she'd spent months living inside it in her head, every email, every long Saturday on her bedroom floor waiting for Mr. Nobody, had added another wing to some vast, gleaming place that didn't actually exist. The real thing was a converted office suite on the third floor of a university annex, fluorescent lit, smelling faintly of burnt coffee. A whiteboard covered in phonetic notation stood in the corner, clearly erased and rewritten 100 times. Maggie met her at the elevator, arms already half open for a hug that felt entirely unstrange by now, given everything the two of them had already sat through together in the dark. "You found parking okay?" "Yeah, only got lost once." "That's basically a personal best around here." Maggie held the door. "Come on, I want you to meet everyone properly, and there's something I want to show you." Something turned out to be a monitor in the corner of the main room. Two grad students clustered around it, who both looked up when Rue walked in with the particular wide-eyed attention of people who had clearly been told who she was more than once in detail. Maggie introduced them. Priyanka, who ran the acoustic modeling, sharp-eyed and quick to laugh. Dev, younger, quieter, already reaching to shake Rue's hand like he wasn't sure if that was the right move and doing it anyway. "This is Rue," Maggie said simply. And Rue felt something in her chest do a slow, unfamiliar loosening at being Rue. A name, a person instead of a rumor or a liar or a kid with an imagination. On the monitor was a spectrogram, 41 fragments laid out in colored bands like a subway map with no clear route through it. "This is everything we've got," Maggie said. "Every recording, every transcription, 3 years of it, and until 3 weeks ago I could not have told you which piece came before which. I could tell you what more or less but not when." "I know how it goes," Rue said. She pulled the closest chair over without being asked, sat, and looked at the screen the way she'd look at a page of sheet music, not reading it exactly, more like recognizing it. "Play fragment 9. Someone played it. A low, sing-song murmur, 3 seconds long, gone almost as soon as it started. Rue hummed 4 notes back, unconsciously, before she caught herself. "That's not an opener, that's the second half of something. It wants to fall into fragment 31, you've got that one labeled way over on the other side of the board, but they're the same breath, basically. Whoever recorded 31 just caught it a beat later in the cycle." The room went quiet in a specific way. Rue had heard that quiet before at school, when a substitute played a video and half the room laughed, except this was the other version of it. The version where the silence meant someone is finally saying the thing we've been circling for years. "Play 31, Maggie said. They played it, it matched. "Okay," Maggie said quietly, mostly to herself. "Okay." They worked like that for most of the afternoon, Rue calling out order, sometimes correcting herself, sometimes going still for a long moment before she was sure, while Priyanka and Dev fed fragments into a growing sequence on the whiteboard, colored magnets sliding into new positions, the subway map slowly resolving into something closer to an actual line. Rue didn't know the words. She said so more than once, almost apologetically, and every time Maggie waved it off. "The words are the easy part," Maggie said, around hour 3, rubbing at her eyes. "We've had partial translations sitting in a drawer for a year because we had no idea what order to put them in. You have no idea what you just handed us." "I kind of do," Rue said. "I've had 10 years to think about what handing it to someone would feel like." Maggie looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way she'd started to since those nights on the bedroom floor, something quieter passing between them than it had in any of the emails. 10 years is a long time to carry something alone. "It wasn't the worst part," Rue said before she could think better of it. "What was it?" Rue picked at the edge of the desk, the way she used to pick at splinters on a porch step. Being the only one who knew, having it and not being able to hand it to anyone. She shrugged, like it cost less to say than it actually did. "Nobody ever asked me how do you know this and actually wanted the real answer. Not once in 10 years, not until you." Maggie didn't push. She just nodded once like she was filing that away somewhere careful and went back to the whiteboard. It became Rue's second home that fall, the way the house had already become Maggie's. She took the train up most weekends, notebooks in her bag, and claimed the same corner desk without anyone deciding that on purpose. She learned which coffee machine actually worked. She learned that Maggie ate lunch at her desk every single day and would forget to if nobody reminded her and started reminding her, and Maggie started letting her. Dev kept a running tally of confirmed sequence pairs on a sticky note taped to his monitor, updating it like a scoreboard, and cheered, quietly, every time Rue added another. It didn't feel like helping a researcher anymore by the 3rd or 4th Saturday. It felt like something closer to belonging somewhere, a desk that was hers, a rhythm that was theirs, a version of her whole strange, silent childhood finally being put to use instead of carried alone. Chapter 9: The Pressure. Maggie didn't mention the email for 3 days. Rue only found out because she was at the lab on a Tuesday, off schedule, dropping off a notebook she'd left behind the weekend before. And Maggie's office door was closed, actually closed, which it never was. And through it Rue could hear one side of a phone call. Maggie's voice pitched low and tight in a register Rue hadn't heard from her before. Because we don't have full corroboration on the closing sequence, that's why. I'm not being difficult, I'm being accurate. There's a difference. A pause. No, I understand the timeline you'd like. I'm telling you the science isn't there yet. Another pause, longer. When Maggie spoke again, something in her voice had gone flatter, more careful, the sound of someone choosing every word because the alternative was saying something she couldn't take back. That's not fair, and you know it's not fair. Fine, I'll have something for the board by Friday. The door opened a minute later. Maggie looked tired in a way Rue hadn't seen on her before, not lab tired, not up too late tired, but a heavier kind, the kind that sits behind the eyes. Hey, Maggie tried for normal and mostly got there. I didn't know you were coming by. I left my notebook. Rue held it up, then didn't move to leave. Who was that? Maggie considered lying. Rue could see her consider it, and then visibly decided against it, the same way she'd decided weeks ago now to just tell the truth in an email instead of managing it. The board, the people funding the study. She rubbed her eyes. They want to go public, soon. A formal announcement, the fragments, the sequence, everything we've built. A big one, press, cameras, the whole thing. That's good though, isn't that the whole point? It would be if we were ready. Maggie sat back down heavily, gestured for Rue to take the other chair. We have the sequence, most of it thanks to you. Without you, honestly, we might still be years away from this. But we don't have the closing fragment confirmed. Not really. I've got one recording that might be it, and every instinct I have telling me we shouldn't be reading the whole thing out loud to a room full of cameras until we're sure. So tell them that. I did. Maggie's laugh had no humor in it at all. You know what they said, that I've always been the most careful person in the building, and that's usually an asset, and right now it's costing them a news cycle they've already started spending money to set up. They used the word perfectionist, like it's a diagnosis. She looked at Rue, something apologetic in it, like she felt responsible for a decision that had never been hers to make. They as much as told me if I keep dragging my feet, they'll find someone else to read the recommendation into the record. Someone who'll say it's ready when I won't. Rue sat with that for a moment. Can they actually do that, take it away from you? They fund the department, they can do almost anything they want. Maggie exhaled slowly, staring at the whiteboard through the open door, the subway map resolved now, one long unbroken line where a scatter of colored fragments used to be. I've spent 3 years on this. If I walk away from it now on principle, someone with a lot less care is going to stand up in front of a room and read something I'm not sure is finished, and I won't even be in the building when it happens. So you're doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. Maggie said it like an admission, not a decision. She stopped, looked at Rue for a moment like she was deciding something. Can I tell you something? Rue nodded. I don't think this is right. I think we're moving faster than the work can hold. But the alternative is worse, and I'd rather be in the room, doing everything I can to get it right, than not in the room at all. Rue thought about a kitchen counter, a warm, distracted voice, a door closing so gently nobody even felt it shut. She thought about how many times in her life someone with more authority than her had decided what was true, what mattered, what got said out loud and what got quietly filed away, and how strange it was now to be sitting across from someone who was fighting that exact same current and losing anyway, for reasons that had nothing to do with not caring enough. When? She asked. 6 weeks, Maggie said. They want it before the holidays. Good visuals, they said, a hopeful story to end the year on. She said it like the words tasted bad in her mouth. A hopeful story. Neither of them said anything for a while after that. Outside the office, down the hall, Rue could hear Dev's voice, cheerful, oblivious, arguing with Priyanka about something on the whiteboard. the ordinary sound of people who didn't yet know the countdown had started. "I'm scared," Maggie said finally, quietly, like it cost her something to say it plainly. "I don't know what happens when it's finished. Nobody does. And in 6 weeks I'm going to stand in front of a room and finish it anyway." Rue reached over and put her hand flat on the desk, near Maggie's, not quite touching. "You won't be the only one in the room who knows what it means to do something scary, because the alternative is worse." Maggie looked at her for a long moment, and something in her face loosened just slightly, the way a held breath finally lets go. "No," she agreed, "I suppose I won't be." Chapter 10: The Larger Team. The new people arrived on a Monday, 11 of them, with badges and laptop bags, and the particular brisk energy of people who had been given a deadline and told not to miss it. Maggie introduced them in the main room all at once, a list of names and specialties Rue only half absorbed, a phonetics team from a partner university, 2 translators on loan from somewhere with a name too long to remember, a project manager named Colin who carried a clipboard even though nobody else in the building had used paper for anything in years. He shook Rue's hand a beat too firmly and said, "So you're the source," in a tone that made the word sound like a piece of equipment. "I guess so," Rue said, and didn't correct him, though something in her flinched at it quietly, the way you flinch at a shoe that doesn't quite fit but you've already worn out the door. The whiteboard came down within the week. In its place, a shared screen, a live tracking document, a schedule broken into 15-minute blocks with Rue's name typed into several of them like an appointment. Rue's availability, confirm sequence, fragments 33 through 38. Seeing her own life rendered that way, small and procedural, did something quiet and strange to her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. The Friday dinners stopped being Friday dinners. Maggie still came to the house sometimes, but later now, later and more tired, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open instead of her hands busy chopping something, apologizing for it every time in a voice that had started to sound thin from overuse. "I'm sorry, it's just. Colin needs the projected timeline by tomorrow, and the translators are stuck on fragment 19 and..." She'd stop herself. "Sorry, I said I wouldn't do this here." "It's fine," Rue said every time, and every time it was a little less true. The vigils changed too. What used to be 3 people on a floor unhurried waiting together became 5 or 6, then more, a rotating handful of researchers taking shifts overnight with recorders and headphones, treating Mr. Nobody's 1 a.m. hour like a shift change at a hospital. They were polite. They were careful with Rue's room, careful with her things, careful in the specific overcorrect way of people who had been briefed beforehand on being careful. None of them asked her what a pause meant the way her mother once had, half asleep, genuinely wanting to know. They asked things like, can you confirm timestamp accuracy, and is this consistent with prior observed behavior, and wrote her answers down without quite looking at her while they did it. Her mother stopped coming up most nights. She said it was because the room got crowded, which was true, and didn't say the other thing, which was also true, that watching strangers in matching lanyards crouch around the shadow that had once been her whole private grief, notebooks out, timing his silences with stopwatches, had put something back behind her eyes that 3 months of Friday dinners had only just started to loosen. Rue caught her once, in the hallway near midnight, just standing there, not going in, not leaving either, and neither of them said anything about it, the way neither of them said anything about most of the things that mattered most. Even Maggie seemed to feel it. Late one night after everyone else had gone, she lingered in the doorway of Rue's room the way she had the very first time, and said quietly, almost to herself, "This used to be smaller." "Yeah," Rue said. "I liked it smaller." "Me too." Neither of them said the rest of it out loud, that smaller had also meant slower, and careful, and theirs, in a way that 11 badges and a spreadsheet could never quite be again. Maggie didn't stay long after that. She had a call at 7 the next morning with Colin about press logistics, and a form to review about audience capacity, and 6 weeks, now closer to 4, ticking steadily down toward a room full of cameras and a rhyme that wasn't quite finished yet. Chapter 11, The Translation. The breakthrough, when it finally came, didn't look like a breakthrough. It looked like Priyanka staring at a screen full of colored bars at 11 at night, saying quietly, "Ha," in a tone that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing. "What?" Maggie said, already crossing to look over her shoulder. "The suffix." Priyanka pointed at a cluster of nearly identical waveforms. "Escher. It's attached to every single number fragment Ru's sequenced so far. Same position every time. Post-nominal if we're calling these things nouns." She pulled up a second chart, frequency counts stacked like a bar graph. "It's the single most common recurring unit in the entire corpus, more common than anything else we've isolated." "So it's doing grammatical work," Maggie said. "Or it's the only word they know," Dev offered from the other desk, only half joking. They ran the frequency data against 6 weeks of literature on child language acquisition, a stack of papers Maggie had asked for 2 months earlier, and nobody had gotten around to until the deadline made everyone desperate. Cross-linguistically across dozens of unrelated human languages, a strikingly similar pattern showed up in the earliest utterances children produced: high-frequency, low-complexity suffixes bolted onto counting words, size words, distance words. Small, close, mine. The scaffolding you build a sentence on before you have any of the words that make it a real sentence. "It's not doing complex grammatical work," Maggie said slowly, reading it over Priyanka's shoulder. "It's doing simple work. It's a diminutive, a smallness marker." She looked up. "This isn't an adult language. Structurally, at least, it's behaving like the earliest stage of one." Ru, sitting at her corner desk with a notebook open, felt something settle into place that she hadn't known was unsettled. "That's why I could learn it," she said, half to herself. "Not because it's simple, because it's built the way kids build things. I wasn't decoding a language, I was just doing what a little kid does, mimicking the sound of it before I understood it." Nobody said anything for a moment. Maggie looked at her for a long moment, something moving behind her eyes that looked almost like grief again, though not quite the same kind as before. "You were the only person in this building young enough for long enough to actually be fluent in how it thinks," Maggie said finally. "That's not luck. That's not a fluke. It's the reason none of us could have done what you did, no matter how many years we spent on it." Somewhere in the middle of all of it, almost too gradually to notice at first, the shadows got louder. Not louder the way a radio gets louder. Louder the way a room gets louder when more people start talking in it, more of them whispering now, on any given night, than had ever whispered before. Global monitoring stations that used to log a handful of active fragments a week started logging dozens a day. A live tracker one of the university's undergrads had built as a side project, half a joke at first, started trending on its own. A world map dotted with small pulsing lights, each one a shadow that had, sometime in the last 24 hours, moved its mouth. Mr. Nobody kept his same schedule, mostly 1 a.m., 4 minutes, the same handful of fragments in the same order Ru had known since she was 7. But even he seemed to be leaning into it lately, the whisper a fraction more distinct than it used to be, like something being said slightly closer to your ear than before. "It's not just us," Maggie said one night, staring at the tracker on her laptop instead of the whiteboard, something tight in her voice that hadn't been there a month earlier. "It's everywhere, every site we monitor. It's like they know we're close." "Or it's a coincidence," Priyanka said, not sounding like she believed it either. Nobody had a better theory. They kept working because there was nothing else to do, and because the deadline didn't care what the shadows were doing any more than it cared what Maggie thought was responsible. After that, things moved fast. the specific kind of fast that comes after months of nothing. With Escher anchored, Priyanka's models started proposing candidate meanings for adjacent morphemes by structural similarity, they clustering with anticipation weighting verbs across the corpus, rove then clustering with motion in a circle, patterns a machine could surface in an afternoon that would have taken a human linguist a year to notice by hand. None of it was certain. All of it was probable, stacked probability on probability, confirmed piece by piece against the one thing no algorithm had. Rue sequencing, which told them not just what a fragment might mean, but where it belonged, and what came directly before and after it, and therefore what kind of meaning would actually make sense in that slot. It was, Maggie said one night, watching the translation come together line by line on the shared screen, less like decoding a message and more like listening to a very young child sing something they'd learned before they could talk. Pattern first. Meaning arriving late, dragged in afterward by context and repetition, and the sheer stubborn accumulation of everyone finally paying enough attention. By the fourth week they had the whole thing. 9 lines confirmed outright, the last one, fragment 41, held together by inference and pattern matching rather than certainty, a probable translation instead of a proven one. The tracker map by then was solid light. Every recorded site on Earth was active most nights now, the pulsing individual dots long since merged into something closer to a glow. Nobody in the lab said it out loud, but everybody had started checking the map first thing every morning, the way you check the weather before a storm you already knew was coming. Maggie stared at the finished translation a long time before she said anything. "It's a counting rhyme," she said finally, quietly, like she couldn't quite believe what it actually was after 3 years of believing it would be something else. "It's a lullaby, she stopped, looked at Rue. "It's exactly what you always said it sounded like." Rue didn't say anything for a moment. It was strange, hearing someone else finally say it out loud, like a word she'd been carrying around so long it had stopped feeling like a word. "Yeah," she said eventually, quieter than she meant to. "I think I always knew that, I just never had anyone to say it to." Nobody laughed, not the way her mother had all those years ago over a bowl of cereal, not unkindly but laughing all the same. This room just sat with it. All the while behind them, nobody had thought to close the laptop, and the map on its screen kept glowing brighter and brighter the whole time they sat there. Chapter 12, The Ceremony. The venue was too big for what it was, Rue thought. A convention hall usually rented out for trade shows and car expos, retrofitted in a hurry with a stage, a podium, and enough folding chairs to seat 1,000 people who'd applied for tickets within an hour of the announcement going out. Above the stage, a banner in a typeface some marketing team had clearly agonized over. A voice finally understood. Rue sat in the second row, between her mother and an empty seat that had been reserved, at Maggie's insistence, for a girl the program didn't name, research contributor. The credential badge said, "Nothing more," which was exactly how Rue had asked for it to read. Her mother's hand found hers before the lights even dimmed. Colin was somewhere near the front, clipboard traded for a headset now, murmuring cues to people Rue couldn't see. Cameras lined the back of the hall on risers, a dozen of them, red lights blinking, patient. Somewhere out past the cameras, Rue knew millions more were watching this live-streamed, in kitchens and offices and dorm rooms all over a world that had spent 13 years learning to live beside something it never once understood. Maggie came out from the wings a few minutes past the hour, in a blazer Rue had never seen her wear, hair pulled back tighter than usual, her hands empty except for a single printed page. She looked, from the second row, exactly like what she was. Someone standing somewhere she hadn't wanted to stand yet, doing the best she could with the time she'd been given instead of the time she'd asked for. She found Rue in the crowd before she reached the podium. Just for a second. A small nod, private, meant for exactly one person in a room of 1,000. Rue nodded back. Maggie's opening remarks were short: 13 years, 41 fragments, 3 years of research. A debt of gratitude to a research contributor who preferred to remain private. A debt of gratitude to a team who'd worked around the clock. A debt of gratitude to the funders who'd made it all possible. Said in a tone so carefully neutral that only Rue, maybe, understood exactly how much that last sentence was costing her. Then she looked down at the page. For 13 years, Maggie said, we've heard something and understood nothing. Tonight, for the first time, we understand what they've been saying. A ripple went through the crowd, not quite applause, something more like a held breath finally letting go a little. Rue felt her mother's grip tighten. On the huge screen behind Maggie, a live feed cut in, split into a dozen panels, shadows from a dozen cities, all standing exactly as they always stood. Motionless, blank-eyed, waiting the way they had always been waiting for 13 years, for something nobody in that hall had known to give them until tonight. Maggie began to read. One little shadow by the door. Never seen the world before. Her voice was steady, pitched to carry, the sweet, sing-song cadence of a children's rhyme sitting strangely against the size of the room, the weight of the cameras, the 1,000 held breaths in the dark. On the screen nothing happened, not yet. 2 little shadows, still and small. Learning how to walk at all. Rue felt it before she understood what she was feeling. A change in the quality of the silence in the room. Subtle, the kind of thing you register in your skin before your mind catches up. On the screen, in a city Rue didn't recognize, a shadow's mouth began to move. 3 little shadows in a row. Watching how the children go. Not one shadow now. Several, scattered across different panels, different continents, different time zones, all beginning faintly, almost imperceptibly, to move their mouths in time with Maggie's voice. In times not randomly, not delayed with her. Rue's mother made a small sound beside her, both hands coming up over her mouth exactly the way they had on the floor of Rue's room, months ago now, watching Mr. Nobody for the first time. Maggie's eyes flicked to the screen. Just for a fraction of a second, Rue saw it happen, saw the exact moment Maggie registered what was on it, saw the smallest falter in her breath before she caught herself and kept reading, because 1,000 people were watching and the cameras were rolling, and there was no version of this where she could simply stop. 4 little shadows, heads tucked low. Waiting for the ones they know. More shadows now, dozens of panels, all moving, all in time. Maggie's voice didn't waver on the words themselves, but Rue, who had spent 13 years learning to hear the smallest cracks in a voice trying to sound steadier than it felt, heard it anyway. A tightness, a held note underneath the sing-song rhythm. Maggie found Rue's eyes across the hall. It lasted less than a second. Nobody around them would have noticed anything at all. A researcher glancing at a face in the crowd, nothing more. The kind of look that happens 100 times in any public event. But Rue felt the whole weight of it land, unmistakable, private, the two of them the only people in the room who understood exactly how wrong, and how right, this moment actually was. We tried to wait, the look said. We didn't get to. I know, Rue's look said back, I know. Then Maggie looked back down at the page and kept going, because there was nothing else left to do but finish. 5 little shadows, hand in hand. Counting all the ones who stand. 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Round and one more time. Every shadow on the screen was moving now. Not just the panels, Rue understood with a slow, cold certainty that this meant every shadow everywhere, in every city, every yard, every child's bedroom on earth, was speaking in perfect time with a woman standing on a stage in a rented convention hall, reciting words translated from a language none of them had spoken back in 13 years of listening. Her mother's hand had gone rigid in hers. Rue held it anyway, held it harder, and didn't look away from the stage. 10 little shadows, home at last. Quiet now, the waiting's past. Maggie's voice caught just barely, just once on quiet now. She pushed through it. Somewhere in the hall, a phone camera's flash went off. Too bright, wrong, someone breaking protocol to capture the moment. And nobody stopped them, because nobody in that room was thinking about protocol anymore. Maggie took a breath. The last 2 lines sat on the page in front of her, the ones held together by inference rather than certainty, the ones she had never been fully sure of. She read them anyway. Hush now, close your eyes. We were only passing by. For 1 full second, nothing happened at all. The whole hall seemed to hold that second in its chest. 1,000 people, a dozen cameras. A woman on a stage with her hand still raised slightly from turning the page. A shadow's mouth suspended mid-motion on every screen and in every city on Earth. The entire species, however briefly, entirely still. Then all at once, without sound, without warning, without anything that could be called an ending except the simple fact of it, they were gone. Not faded, not dissolved. Simply completely absent, the way a held note stops when the breath runs out, one instant present in every corner of the world, the next instant nowhere at all. The silence that followed was not the ordinary silence of a room without sound. It was the silence of 13 years of low, constant, half-noticed presence, suddenly and totally withdrawn. A silence with the exact shape of everything that used to fill it. A held breath the whole world hadn't known it was holding until it was asked, all at once, to let go. Nobody in the hall clapped. Nobody spoke. Somewhere near the back, someone began very quietly to cry, and the sound of it seemed enormous in a room that had, until a moment ago, held 1,000 held breaths and was now holding nothing at all. Rue looked at the empty corner of the stage where a shadow had stood beside the podium for the entire ceremony, motionless, unremarked upon, the way shadows always had been. It wasn't there anymore. Her mother's hand was shaking in hers. Rue held it tighter. On the stage, Maggie stood very still, the page trembling slightly in her hand, staring out at a room full of people who had just watched something end that none of them, not even her, not even Rue, fully understood, and for one long moment across all that distance, her eyes found Rue's again. Neither of them looked away this time. Neither of them smiled either. Somewhere in that look was every year Rue had spent alone in the dark, every door that had ever closed gently on a truth nobody wanted, every night on a bedroom floor learning a song that had, it turned out, been counting down to exactly this. And somewhere underneath all of it, quiet and enormous and entirely new, was the specific, sinking certainty that whatever came next, none of them had the first idea what it would be. Epilogue. They drove home in silence, the 3 of them. Maggie insisted on it, said she didn't want either of them navigating a crowded parking lot with cameras still flashing, and neither Rue nor her mother argued. Nobody said much on the drive either. The radio stayed off. Outside the window, towns went by looking exactly as they always had, which felt somehow like its own kind of impossible. The house was dark when they got home. Rue's mother turned on the kitchen light out of habit and then just stood there a moment, hand still on the switch, like she'd forgotten what came next. "I'm going to go up," Rue said. Her mother nodded, didn't move to stop her, didn't move at all. The stairs felt longer than they used to. Rue's door was open a crack, the way she always left it now, and she pushed it the rest of the way and stood in the doorway for a long time before she made herself step inside. The corner was empty. Not dark, not shadowed, not different in any way a camera could have caught. Just empty the way any corner of any room is empty, a stretch of wall, a strip of carpet, nothing standing there at all. It looked, Rue thought, exactly like a corner was supposed to look. That was the part she couldn't get past. 10 years of certainty that this space held something, and now it held nothing, and the nothing looked identical to what nothing was always supposed to look like everywhere else in the world. She sat down on the floor anyway, same spot, knees pulled up back against the bed frame, the way she'd sat almost every night since she was 7 years old. She didn't sing anything. There was nothing left to sing along to. She just sat there in the quiet and let herself feel the size of it, not relief, not exactly, and not quite grief either, though it stood close enough to grief that she wasn't sure yet how to tell the two apart. Downstairs faintly, she heard her mother's footsteps cross the kitchen, stop, cross back. Not settling anywhere. Just moving the way you move when your body hasn't caught up yet to what your mind already knows. Rue's phone buzzed once near midnight. A text from Maggie, 3 words long. "Are you okay?" Rue looked at it for a while before she answered. "I don't know yet," she wrote back, "are you?" Same, Maggie wrote. And then a minute later, "I keep waiting for it to start again. I don't think it's going to." No, Rue typed, "I don't think it is either." She set the phone down and sat a while longer in the dark, in the quiet, in a room that had held one particular, private wonder for as long as she could remember, and now, for the first time in her whole life, held nothing but her. Eventually her mother's footsteps came up the stairs, paused outside the door. Rue didn't say anything, and after a moment her mother came in anyway, the way she had that first night with Maggie, and sat down beside her on the floor without being asked. They didn't talk. There wasn't anything to say yet that either of them had found the words for. Her mother just reached over in the dark, the way she had once before, and Rue let her hand be found, and the two of them sat together in the corner of a room that used to hold a shadow, listening to a silence that had never, in all the years Rue had lived beside it, sounded quite this large. Somewhere outside, faint through the window, a car passed on the road below, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling, gone as quickly as they'd come, and for one unguarded second before she could stop herself, Rue found she was still listening for something to answer it. Nothing did.